Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's University of Maine Cooperative Extension's Preserving the Maine Harvest webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. Believe it or not, this is our final food preservation webinar in our 23-week series. These webinars have delivered current USDA recommendations for preserving food at home, corresponding with what's growing in your own garden, as well as what's for sale from our local farmers. I'm Kathy Savoy, and today we will also be joined by my other colleagues, Lisa Fishman in Aroostook County, Kate McCarty back in the demo kitchen here in our Cumberland County office in Falmouth, Lori Bowen, and our guest chef, Rob Dumas, who will be live in the Dr. Matthew Hyland's pilot plant demo kitchen at our University of Maine at Orono campus. The mission of the University of Maine Cooperative Extension is to help Maine people improve their lives through an educational process that uses research-based knowledge focused on issues and needs. Our educational programs include agriculture, home horticulture, including the ever popular Master Gardener program, 4-H youth development, food safety, nutrition, and of course, food preservation, which also encompasses the Master Food Preserver program. Today, we will be focusing on cranberries and how to preserve them. Personally, we all think that these tart berries are an underappreciated local food. It's so easy to preserve them by popping them in the freezer to use them later on in baking and cooking, or to can them as jams, jellies, sauces, and chutneys, or even one of my favorites, cranberry salsa. We'll be covering how to do all of these things, and then we will also have Chef Rob show you how to make some delicious meals that incorporate local cranberries. First, some housekeeping, and if you've joined us before, you know that this is how we have it set up. We have our webinar set up so that you can hear and see us, but we cannot hear or see you. But we, of course, want to hear your questions so that we can answer them. And you can ask those by simply typing them into the Q&A box located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And if we don't get to your questions live during our webinar, Lisa will follow up with you via email later this week. So that's all for our housekeeping. So let's get started with our final webinar. So in Maine, we can find cranberries widely available October through December at local farm stands, grocery stores, and farmers markets. In addition to being incredibly flavorful, cranberries are also very high in vitamin C and antioxidants. Cranberries were used by the indigenous people of Maine to create a sort of energy bar called pemmican. It used dried meats, berries, and fat. The vitamin C in cranberries helped to preserve the meat, as well as to prevent vitamin deficiency diseases like scurvy. These acidic berries store well in the freezer or can be canned into a variety of products. First, we'll discuss freezing, and then Kate is going to join us in the demonstration kitchen and show us how to make cranberry chutney. We'll also discuss how to can cranberry sauce, jams, and jellies. Remember that freezing cranberries is a super duper simple way to preserve them for use later on. Or you could break them out again and can them as a cozy wintertime cooking project. It's really easy to prepare cranberries for the freezer. First, you're going to sort through the berries. You're going to look to discard any that are soft, wrinkled, or blemished. Once you've done that, all you need to do is wash the cranberries under cool running water, and then you want to drain them very well. By draining them, you are getting rid of any water that could cause them to clump later on when you do freeze them. And remember, you always want to pack things to be frozen into freezer grade bags, or you want to use the tray method and spread them out on a tray to freeze before packaging them. This allows the cranberries to be easier to use later on, as they will freeze individually versus being apt to clump up in a kind of ice block of cranberries. And then if you do use the tray method, you do want to package the cranberries up after they have frozen solid. And again, put them right into a freezer grade plastic bag or a glass container for best quality. The bags the cranberries come in are not ideal for storing in the freezer, as they tend to be made from a thinner material and frequently have holes in them for ventilation. As always, don't forget to label and date your bags of food. Frozen cranberries can look a lot different. They can actually look like frozen cherries or strawberries after a few months in the freezer. And remember to use up your frozen cranberries within 8 to 12 months for best quality. You can use frozen cranberries anywhere in a recipe that calls for fresh ones, in quick beds, muffins, jam, sauce, and this chutney recipe that Kate is going to demonstrate for us. And now we're going to join Kate in the demonstration kitchen. Kate?
Great, thanks, Kathy. So I'm going to show you how to make this chutney recipe. I feel like I have made every chutney that's available throughout the season this year. I just really realized how much I enjoy chutney. I started in the spring with the rhubarb chutney. I burned through that already, so I made an apple chutney late last month, and now the cranberry chutney. I think there's also a tomato apple chutney, which would be good for late summer, early fall on the National Center for Home Food Preservation. So this recipe is a combination of high acid and low acid ingredients. And so like any other canning recipe, that means that it's important that you follow the recipe explicitly as written. So no changes to any of the quantities of ingredients. So you start with 24 ounces of cranberries. Conveniently, that's just 2 bags of cranberries. And then there's brown and white sugar. There's 2 cups of golden raisins, 1 cup of orange juice. There is white vinegar diluted to a 5% acidity, a cup of chopped onions, 3 cinnamon sticks, and a little bit of fresh ginger that you peel and grate. So it's simply just a recipe that you dump together and cook. So that's what I did behind the scenes. Measured all those ingredients out, took a picture for you there, and then combined them all into my stock pot. So I brought it to a boil. And it has really transformed from those fresh cranberries and raw onions down to a thick sauce. You'll see it once I start to fill the jars. All the cranberries have exploded because of the heat, so they really turned into like a sauce. And then the natural pectin in them has started to help thicken up as well. The raisins have plumped up from the addition of all the liquid, and then the onions have cooked down really nicely. So this is going to be a delicious condiment. When I'm finished up, I'll discuss ways in which I like to use it. Other behind the scenes things I did was, other than prepare the chutney, was to prepare my boiling water bath canner and the jars. So I have half pint jars, the 8-ounce jelly jar size. And then I threw in a few of the 4-ounce jars. So if I get down to the last bit of my batch and I can't fill an 8-ounce jar, then I have the 4-ounce jar ready to go to fill as well. So I washed those up by hand. You could also wash them in the dishwasher. And then I put them in the boiling water bath canner. So it is just a big pot of boiling water. You can see it here on the stove. It has a rack in the bottom. This is the one from Ball, the more high-end unit. So this canner itself is about $100. Of course, they make the more familiar ones, the enamelware ones that you've probably seen that are $20, $25. But you can use any big pot you have on hand that fits a rack in the bottom. And then it's deep enough so that when my little jelly jars are in there, they're clearly covered by at least an inch of water once the jars are filled. So I've got the jars in there preheating. So they're really just warming up so that when I put my hot chutney in there and then put it back in the hot water, it will help reduce the chance of any jars breaking, and also allow the water to come back to a boil. So our chutney recipe is canned for 10 minutes. So that means that you don't have to sterilize your jars ahead of time. If you are canning a recipe that is canned for less than 10 minutes, you do need to take the extra time to boil your jars in the canner for 10 minutes before you add the product and then can it. But our chutney is 10 minutes of processing time, which means that the jars will become sterile while the chutney is being canned. So we get to skip that step, which is good because we have enough going on here already. But they are nice and hot so that they're ready for me to fill. And then other than that, I just got all my canning supplies out at arm's reach here, ready to go to start filling the jars. So I'm gonna turn the heat off on the chutney. Boiled for about 15 minutes, and it has a tendency to scorch because it's so thick and sugary, and also splatter. So if you have one of those like pot holders that goes on your hand, it's a great place to use it to stir to protect yourself from any burns. So I'm gonna move it over here because I'm left-handed, and I'll still be able to reach my canner here. Actually, I'm going to move to the center burner just so you can see it a little better. Our power burner, which is more heat than we need in this case, but nice to have it. All right. So this thing's happy there. Got my handy dandy jar lifter to help me get jars in and out of the canner. So I'm just going to demonstrate filling a few jars for you out of the 8 or so that I'll get. But if I were doing this not on camera, I would just take all the jars out and then fill them up quickly. But I'm going to move a little bit slower to really go through every step with you. So I'll just do a few at a time so that my jars don't cool down too much while they sit. So got my jar funnel, which helps me get all of the chutney into the jars rather than all over the counter. Let me check, make sure you can see the chutney as it goes into the jars. Mostly. Yeah, okay. So you'll be able to see how much it has thickened up compared to just some cranberries floating in vinegar. It was pretty much what it looked like before. Vinegar and orange juice. So I'm just gonna eyeball that close to the top and move on to my next jars. So this is a more assembly line style, where I'll fill these 3 jars and then come back and measure the headspace. So the headspace is the amount of space that you leave at the top, which allows for the chutney to expand during canning and drive all of the air out of the jar. So that's how we achieve the vacuum seal that we're after during the canning process. So headspace is very important. So to that end, you're going to use a headspace measurer to accurately measure your headspace. So this little plastic stick has notches on the bottom that measure fractions of an inch. The second one up from the bottom is 1/2 inch, which is what the headspace for chutney is. So I measure 1/2 inch all the way around. Looks great. This one I overfilled a little, so I always have on hand a little teaspoon to help extract some product if you added too much, or to add some if you just need to make small adjustments. More than your ladle would be able to help you with. Great. And then this one is 1/2 inch as well. And so then you'll want to remove the bubbles. This is a pretty saucy, thick product. And so there shouldn't be too much trapped air, but it can't hurt to really just go the extra step and remove any trapped air that might be inside your chutney here, inside these jars. That could make its way up to the top during processing and mess with your headspace that you measured so carefully. And then just in case, I'll double check it. Okay, so you would repeat that process for all of your jars and then come back and wipe the rims. So this stuff is very thick and sugary, so I just dipped the paper towel there in the warm water to help remove any cooling chutney from the rim of the jar here. One that I overfilled got a little sticky, but the rest are pretty clean. You're really just focusing on like the very top of the jar, the surface where it meets the underside of the lid is where the seal will form. Very hot. So then I've got my clean lids. You can see they've got the attached sealing compound, which is what allows the air to escape during canning but not get back in. So again, that vacuum seal forms. So apply one of those to each. And then apply your screw bands or the ring until the lid or till it's on there fingertip tight. So just using the strength of your fingers to tighten the lid. And then these 3 will go back in. Obviously I have some left over, so you would just repeat that process until all of your jars were filled. Again, if you can't meet the additional 1/2 inch of headspace, you can use one of these little 4-ounce jars, and maybe you can meet that 1/2 inch headspace on your last jar. So once all your chutney is put into jars and then loaded into the canner, we'll double check to make sure there's at least 1 inch of water over the tops of all the jars. Put the lid back on and bring the water back to a boil. This will take a few minutes, which is not a problem. This is already a very cooked product. It won't hurt it to be cooked a little bit longer while we're waiting for the water to return to a boil. And then we'll boil the chutney for 10 minutes as according to our recipe. When the 10 minutes is up, you want to make sure it's a full rolling boil when you start your 10-minute timer, and that you maintain it throughout those whole 10 minutes to reach the proper temperature. Once your 10 minutes is up, you'll turn the heat off, take the lid off, and let it stand for an additional 5 minutes. And this is to help equalize the temperature between the very hot interior canning environment and relatively cool room temperature. This will help reduce a number of problems that could occur when you take your jars out. And then you'll let the jars cool fully for 12 to 24 hours to make sure the seals form. Once all the jars have sealed, come back, check them, make sure they've sealed, label, date them. Just cranberry chutney, 10, 20 is sufficient. And then you can remove the screw bands. So I've got some products we canned previous webinars. You can see we store them without the screw bands. That surprises a lot of people. But this is because the screw bands can rust on, they can trap moisture, they can even harm the seals and cover up signs of spoilage. So it's best to remove the rings and store them without them. You'll need them on hand when you open the jar and are serving it to keep the lid on, but they don't do anything during storage and can actually detract from the product overall. So remove the screw bands, store your food in a cool, dark, dry place, and then do your best to use it within a year for best quality. So the ways that I like to use this chutney, the cranberry chutney in particular, obviously lends itself well to roasted poultry. So if you want to add it as a side dish to your holiday table or just a roast chicken weekend night. It's also great on sandwiches. So if you have your traditional turkey sandwich afterwards, you can use it there, or even just the sliced deli meat from the grocery store. And you can mix it with mayonnaise or cream cheese, sour cream to make a dip. I went to a party this summer where they had a store-bought mango chutney that was mixed with some whipped cream cheese, and it was absolutely fabulous. So you could make your own homemade version of that using your chutney. But really it goes great, of course, with Indian food is how it's traditionally served, but you'll be surprised to find anywhere you can add a little excitement through this cranberry chutney condiment. All right, that is it for me. So we are gonna go to Lisa, who's gonna tell you more about ways you can can cranberries in sauce and other recipes.
Thank you, Kate. I have never had cranberry chutney, so that is a recipe that I think is going to be on my gifts to give this Christmas. So cranberries are naturally high in pectin, and that's the substance in fruit that is responsible for the setting up of a jam or a jelly. Cranberry products will naturally thicken up on heating due to the pectin, so they are very easily made into jams, jellies, conserves, and sauce. Making your own homemade cranberry sauce for the holiday table is as easy as just cooking cleaned whole cranberries with sugar and water. The sauce will naturally gel as it cooks. If you prefer a smoother sauce, you can use an immersion blender or strain the fruit out to make a smooth, jellied cranberry sauce. And some people even go so far as to molding their homemade cranberry sauce in a reused can to get those characteristic ridges of the store-bought sauce. The cranberries can also be canned as jam or jelly, and you can add other flavors like apples, orange zest or liqueur, mulling spices, and even herbs like rosemary. The cranberry salsa that Kathy mentioned earlier contains cranberries, onions, serrano peppers, sugar, vinegar, and salt. It's a unique tart and spicy condiment. We'll send that recipe along with our follow-up information later on today. If you have any questions, don't forget to add those to the question and answer box below. But for right now, we're going off to visit Rob in the kitchen for a savory dish highlighting cranberries. Thanks, Rob.
All right, sorry for the slight delay there. Had to get my camera turned on. Welcome to the Dr. Matthew Hyland's pilot plant. I'm Chef Rob Dumas with the School of Food and Agriculture, and I'm very excited today to talk to you guys about one of my favorite fall ingredients, the cranberries. So we've got some lovely cranberries here from Ricker Hill Orchard. We're going to be making a classic French sauce called a gastrique. A gastrique is very similar to a jam or a jelly, but it's typically made with a wine and vinegar reduction so that it's got a little bit more complex flavor to it. Now, we're gonna serve that gastrique with a pork tenderloin that we've cooked sous vide. So sous vide is what I got going on in the corner over here. This is an immersion circulator, and what it does is it heats up a water bath to a precise temperature. That water bath allows you to cook a piece of protein or vegetable to a very precise internal temperature. So I took some pork tenderloin and I put it in my immersion circulator at 140 degrees Fahrenheit. And what that will allow to have happen is this pork tenderloin will equalize in temperature all the way through, and it will be exactly 140 degrees Fahrenheit from edge to edge. And what's neat about that is you don't end up with that kind of, overcooked outer portion along with a very, kind of undercooked inner portion, that bullseye effect. Now, I took my pork out of the water bath. There's a lot of good information on the internet about sous vide cooking, but I will touch on it very briefly today. I took it out of the water bath, I opened my bag, and in the bag, I've got some wonderful kind of pork stock or pork liquid here. This is quite good to add to your ingredients, makes a wonderful pan sauce or a gravy, but for today's purposes, I'm going to discard it. Okay? So I've got my pork out of the water bath. It's cooked to 140 degrees. So the minimum kind of cooking temperature for pork you often hear is 145 or 150. We're going to cook this to about 145, 150. So it will still have just a small amount of pinkness to it, but it will by no means be unsafe to eat. I'm heating up a cast steel pan because even though this pork is fully cooked, it's not incredibly appetizing to eat in its just post sous vide state. It doesn't have a whole lot of color to it, and that color or that browning is what's going to help develop some deeper, more complex flavors. So we're going to give it a quick sear in a hot skillet. Now I love my cast steel. You could use a non-stick, you could use a regular skillet. We're going to start with just a little bit of vegetable oil. This is a good place to use an oil that's got a relatively high smoke point. Not a great place for your extra virgin olive oils or things like that. So I'm going to give that a quick little shake here to make sure I've got my oil adequately hot, because our goal here is not to cook this pork necessarily, but just to brown the outside of it. So we want to be fairly quick about this. Yep, so we got a good little sizzle as soon as it hits the skillet. The pork was already cooked when it went in this pan, so I'm not worried about reusing the pan for the pork to rest in. So we're gonna increase our heat just a little bit, and we're gonna start browning this, trying to get a little bit of color on all four sides, just so it takes on a really beautiful kind of golden brown color. Now, while this pork is resting, we're gonna make a really quick little pan sauce today called the gastrique. So I'm gonna get going on that in just a second. But before we do that, we're going to use another cool technique called a rosé. And what this is basically it's a butter based, and it allows you to use the fat soluble flavors within herbs and garlic, infuse hot butter with that, and then basically baste it all over the piece of meat that you're browning off. So wonderful technique for seafood, a wonderful technique for chicken, pork, steak, you name it. A rosé makes it better. I used to joke around that you know, if I ever get abducted by aliens and they cook me, I want to be cooked and then finished via a butter based. So I'm going to reduce my heat just a little bit so I don't burn my butter right up. I'm going to put that into the skillet along with a couple of cloves of smashed garlic. Now that's going to start to kind of brown and froth very quickly. I'm going to use a large spoon, and I'm going to spoon that hot butter right over my pork. And that's going to very nicely give that pork the flavor of garlic without being coated in garlic. And it's also going to help me even out my browning all over that pork loin. All right, so we're going to get that garlic back into the fat. We'll give our pork a little turn, starting to take on some really beautiful color here. Scoop that up a couple more times, and then we're going to take this pork loin out before we overcook it. All right, so very quick, very easy process. I'm going to go ahead and fill my heat there. Very important when cooking protein, resting, right? If you're not resting your proteins before you're slicing them, you are missing out on what could be some juicy, delicious pork, or protein of any sort. If you cut it too soon, all you're going to do is you're going to allow all of the juices within it to leave it and run out onto your cutting board rather than stay in it. So I've got a little bit of foil here. I'm just going to tint this, and I'm going to set it aside. I'm just going to set it back on top of my sous vide bath where it will stay just barely warm. All right, let's make some gastrique. So for our gastrique, we're going to start by putting a little bit of sugar and water in a pot. That sugar and water, we're going to cook until it takes on an amber color, right? So we're looking to develop some caramelized flavors from that sugar and water. Now, the more water you add, the more water you've got to cook out. So I'm not a big advocate for putting a lot of water, and you honestly don't need water at all. But I've got about 2 tablespoons along with half a cup of sugar. I've got a heat-safe rubber spatula, and I'm not going to stir this much, but I'm going to give it an initial stir just to get everything kind of spread out. And what your pot should look like is about like the consistency of wet sand. And that sugar, as it heats up, is going to melt into liquid. But that water just gives you a little bit of insulation against burning up your sugar, right? Because you want it to caramelize, but you don't want it to burn, right? So we're going to do this over about a medium heat here. And you don't want to stir too much, just a little bit to get it started. So I don't know if you can see that on the camera or not, but our sugar is melting. It's going to go clear in just a minute, and then it's going to begin to take on some amber color. I would advocate for lightly swirling your pot every once in a while rather than stirring it. Though in the long run, we're not making caramel, we're making a gastrique, so it doesn't really matter. Now, our other ingredients for gastrique, we have some Shiraz wine. Shiraz wine isn't the only red wine you could use for this, but I would look for wines that are fruitier with some spice notes rather than a wine that is tannic. So your things like your Cabernet Sauvignons, your Merlots, a lot of those kind of wines are going to give you what could end up being kind of an astringent or bitter sauce. And cranberries are already quite bitter. So I like a Shiraz, a Pinot Noir, a Petit Syrah, something like that that's fruity and bright is going to be a better choice for this type of sauce. So our caramel is already starting, or our sugar is already starting to take on some caramel color. You can see it's bubbling vigorously. And the next thing to go in is going to be our wine. I chose to use balsamic vinegar. I like the fruitiness of balsamic, but you could certainly use a red wine vinegar or a cider vinegar would also be completely acceptable for this and would yield a very good result for you. So we've got the beginnings of some nice caramel color. And for the sake of this demo today, I'm going to go ahead and add in the next part of my ingredient, though I would typically advocate for cooking this a little bit longer and getting it just a little bit darker. But we're going to speed along. We've got just a little bit of color. Now, this next step is very important. If you don't remember anything else I say, don't put your face over the pot when you add in the vinegar and the wine. It's going to violently kind of seize up. It's going to send off a lot of steam immediately, and you don't want that to go right into your face. So when you add that in, the sugar is going to seize up into kind of a big block in the bottom of the pot. That's completely expected. It's what's supposed to happen. Don't stress. It doesn't mean that you've ruined anything. We're going to add in our cranberries. We've got a cup of cranberries, and we're going to bring this up to a simmer, and we're going to cook it until it reduces down to a sauce-like consistency. Now, similar to Kate's chutney, this is something that would be, if you were to make this as a prepared food, you would want to send it in for a process review with the Extension Service to make sure that your pH is low enough for canning. I don't believe there's an approved recipe out there, but it could be a great value-added product if you're a cranberry grower or a farmer interested, or a producer interested in adding a little bit different offering to your jam and jelly lineup. This would definitely be more in the savory use of things. I wouldn't probably put this on toast or anything like that, but really lovely. So this is cooking down. I'm gonna go ahead and use a little TV magic here, and I'm gonna trade it out for the one that I've already got finished. All right, so that's gonna need to cook for about 10 minutes or so in order to hit the appropriate consistency that you're looking for, which is what you see in this pot. So it has a lovely jammy consistency to it. We're going to finish this with a dash of cinnamon, and we're going to put this right over our pork. Okay, so set this aside. Go ahead and move this. All right. So to plate up our pork, I've got a nice warm platter here. In this pot, I have a kabocha squash puree. Kabocha squash are one of my favorite squash to grow. It makes a really lovely puree, nice and flavorful. It's got a beautiful velvety consistency to it. This was simply prepared by simmering the cube peeled squash in milk. I then removed the squash from the milk, pureed it in a blender, put the milk back in incrementally to thin it out until I got to this really lovely velvety consistency. Super delicious underneath proteins. Could be thinned further and become a really lovely soup. Butternut squash also works well for this, but if you're visiting your local farmer's market and you want to expand the world of squash a little bit, I strongly recommend checking out the kabocha squash. So we're going to wait that on our plate in just a second. And we're going to go ahead and grab our pork here. Set that right there. I'll go ahead and throw on a glove, even though I'm just cooking for myself. I'll be a professional and put my gloves on. And we're going to give this pork a slice. Now, when you're slicing a protein, I advocate for using a longer knife. This is a slicing knife here. Use something that's nice and sharp, nice and long. It'll give you a much more even slice of cut protein. So let's set this on our board here. Okay. We're going to go ahead. We'll do a thin slice just to take off the end there. Just going to slice this into maybe 3 or 4 pieces. Okay, I'm going to put my puree right on my plate. Do that right in the middle. Just like that, looks really nice. Set that aside. Take our lovely pork, and we'll cheat today and just use the prettiest pieces. Set that in, just kind of gently fanning it out across that lovely cranberry, or across that lovely kabocha squash. And then we will take our cranberry chutney and we'll go right down the middle. Now, you could do some nice garnish for this with, a little bit of lovely herbs if you wanted to. I'd recommend like parsley or maybe a little bit of chervil. But we're just going to garnish that right up. And you've got a really rustic, lovely dish here featuring a lot of Maine good stuff. So you've got kabocha squash puree, sous vide pork tenderloin, and cranberry chutney. So I hope that you folks give this recipe a try. I hope it's a hit around your family dinner table. And you know, I would encourage you to explore the wild world of cranberries because there's so many fun possibilities. So signing off from the Dr. Matthew Highlands pilot plant, and we'll see you guys next year for more Preserving the Harvest.
I have a couple questions for you, Rob, before you leave.
Okay.
The first one is from Joanne, and she would like to know how long should we let meats rest before cutting into them?
So that's a question that's going to be specific to the size of the protein that you're roasting. If you're roasting something like a 12 or 13 pound ribeye, you might want to let that rest for 30 minutes to an hour. Same thing with a turkey. A nice long rest is going to allow those juices to redistribute. Now, if you're talking about something relatively small like a pork tenderloin, you may only need to rest that for 10 or 15 minutes. It's just it'll be evident how well you rested it by the amount of juice that's on your cutting board. If you've got a lot of juice running out, you probably should have rested a little longer. But yeah, I'd say it depends on the size of the piece of meat.
Okay. And Deb would like to know, does the alcohol burn out of the sauce?
That's a tough question to answer definitively. I would assume yes, because it is reduced down so much and it is subjected to such a high heat. I believe that the alcohol would basically cook out. But if it was something where you had a religious reason to avoid alcohol or something like that, I might not recommend gastriques for you.
Thank you. And that is it for questions that we have right now. We do have another comment from Marianne Rocket, and cranberry quince chutney is also very tasty, Marianne says. And now I'm going to turn the tables on you folks, because I would like to know what you would like to see for upcoming webinars. So if you all could put those in the Q&A box, you could give us some suggestions of what you'd like to see in the future. That would be awesome. And yeah, we don't have any more questions right now, and I'll just wait for folks to put your suggestions in the Q&A. And I guess right now I will turn it over to Kathy.
Okay, thanks so much. So I just want to reiterate what Lori said. As we look to the future and are starting to identify other webinar topics that we can bring to you, we would like to hear directly from you and know more about where your interest lies. And that would be from the food and nutrition standpoint. So if you have topics, we would like to have those put in the Q&A box. And someone mentioned quince, and that is certainly something that I've worked a little bit with, and it is a lovely fall product that you can find. So that would be something that perhaps we could throw into our list of things that we'll cover next year. So please fill us with all sorts of ideas around what we should be bringing to you for educational programming in food preservation. So as we wind down this week and our final of the 23-week series, I want to share with you what the information is that we've been referring to as far as our recommended resources. And know that you will get all of these resources as links in our follow-up email. So some of the ones that are on there, things that we've mentioned already: how to use and preserve Maine cranberries. We have another DIY video that you can watch. We have information on making the cranberry orange chutney that Kate was doing in the kitchen, as well as a conserve, a cranberry sauce, and that cranberry salsa recipe, which is again something that my family has found as an interesting addition to our Thanksgiving holiday menu. I might not serve it as part of our traditional meal, but it's certainly something that makes its way to the table over the course of the long weekend with the holiday celebration. And we also have information on how to grow cranberries. Maine is again a great place where people can grow their own cranberries, so we will include that information. And then we do have another slide that has those traditional go-to reliable resources that we've been advocating for you to use throughout this whole webinar series. So beyond that, we want to once again remind you that if you're still looking to find local produce, of which there is many sources still out there, remember that our UMaine agriculture colleagues have created a great interactive directory of Maine farm products so you can shop directly at farms. Be mindful of any changes that may be occurring as a result of COVID-19. So get yourself informed by looking at their website or call first so you know what you need to do to be a smart consumer at their site. We have an email with these resources and recipes coming your way, as well as a link to our evaluation. We have close to 300 evaluations that have been completed through this webinar series. We'd love to get your feedback. You'll also get a certificate of completion. And if you do complete the evaluation and provide your US mailing address, remember we'll still send you that free Headspace tool, which is what you use when canning. So I'd like to, we've got 4 minutes left, and I'd like to take an opportunity to see if Lori wants to come back on and see what some of those things are that are entered into the Q&A box. If we've got any unanswered questions, or if people are just providing us with their creative thoughts for what future webinars may be. Lori?
We don't have any questions, but we have some awesome suggestions. And with the time remaining, if anyone wants to put any more suggestions in the Q&A, that would be great. I just want to thank everyone for their suggestions, as well as the positive feedback today, thanking us for doing this webinar series. And so it's we're very glad that you all enjoyed it. Let's see here. I'm just going to take one more quick peek. We're still getting some suggestions in. Pears and peaches.
I do see one comment that I could address.
Okay.
We've got a few minutes. So someone did ask about how to make sweetened dried cranberries. So this is a product that we see commonly available in the dried fruit section at our grocery store. And I will let you know that this is a product that numerous times I've had students in the Master Food Preserver class try to make using, a residential style dehydrator. And it has been a difficult product to produce at a high quality. Remember back to our dehydrating class where we talked about how to prevent things from case hardening. And cranberries do need to be sliced in half to prevent that case hardening, which is when the exterior skin dries out faster than the inside of the product. But I have had on numerous occasions people having difficulty achieving a high quality product that is both well sweetened and also dehydrated. So I will again talk about the importance of avoiding case hardening, but also checking is something that they recommend that you do with cranberries. But I think slicing them ahead of time is going to give you a higher quality product. So again, that's just what I've heard on the street. So you may be able to have success with your own dehydrator. Any other questions in there or just comments, Lori?
Just comments.
Okay.
Let's see. Someone has a lot of pears and peaches right now. So I think maybe they're looking for some suggestions on that.
And we do have some resources from our Let's Preserve series on using peaches and pears. So I would encourage you to look at that, particularly the Quick Fact series that we have has information on both freezing and canning those products. So thanks for sneaking a peek into the Q&A box. We just want to once again say this is our last webinar of the 23-week series. We started with this new format way back in late May. And if you want to review any of our past sessions, know that the recordings are posted on our webinar webpage. We have certainly enjoyed presenting a new food preservation topic to you each week, and we want to give a huge thank you for all of you for joining us and making spring, summer, and fall 2020 a great adventure. So thank you and goodbye, everyone.